Hi, everyone. Good morning. Let me post the screen right here. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this professional development series that you have in your institution. My name is Inelda Romero Hall, and I am currently an associate professor and the graduate coordinator of the Learning Design and Technology program at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I have the pleasure of being at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville for the last year. Prior to this role, I was the graduate coordinator of the Instructional Design and Technology program at the University of Tampa for 9 years. So I feel like I'm relatively new in this position at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. But my knowledge and practice on online teaching and learning has been happening for the last 15 plus years, both as a student, so I'm having the perspective of someone who's on the other side of the camera, or on the other side of the online communication, as well as the instructor perspective. And today I want to talk to you about learner-centered and culturally relevant approaches to online teaching and learning. First, I would like to start going over the objectives. After participating on this webinar, ideally you will be able to meet two different objectives. The first one is that you'll be able to describe some of the learner-centered design, development, and user experience strategies that happen within an online course in a learning management system. And the second objective is that you will be able to describe the application of culturally relevant pedagogy to foster an inclusive digital learning environment. So my very first question to you is, are you familiar with critical digital pedagogy? And if you can use the chat to respond, yes, no, more or less, that will be great. I would love to see what you post in the chat. Are you familiar, again, with the concept of critical digital pedagogy? Jolanda says more or less. Amy, no. No. Okay. So I'm guessing a sense that is a different type of terminology. Margaret says a little. Okay. So I'm glad that I get to chat with you about this topic because it kind of sets the foundation for some of the conversations that we're gonna have today. So what is critical digital pedagogy? Well, it has been designed, and I quote, critical digital pedagogy is an approach to teaching and learning predicated on fostering agency and empowering our learners, implicitly and explicitly critiquing oppressive power structures. And what exactly does this mean in an online environment? It means that in your online practice, online teaching experiences, you are going to center community and collaboration. And we're going to talk about community and collaboration quite a bit today throughout the presentation. Also, it means that your online teaching practice it's open to a diverse group of voices, international voices, and it just helps reimagine how communication happens across cultural and political boundaries. It doesn't mean that you're going to not listen to discourses, or there's not going to be disagreement, but there will be disagreement in a polite and open manner. It also focuses on moving away from one single voice to gathering a collective of voices, and considers the use and application outside traditional institutions of education. So it's a little bit more open than just centering of what happens in the classroom, but it just opens the conversations for others to participate. And like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about how this happens in practice today. Now, from my perspective, critical digital pedagogy is based on three very specific areas. The first one is a three-tier design process, which I'm going to explain today. And it like really came out of a collaboration with colleagues who are also in the design of online learning spaces. And then it also takes into consideration elements of culturally relevant pedagogy. And then from my personal perspective, it includes a feminist pedagogy application. And I think that one of the things that is really important for me to highlight is that this critical digital pedagogy will be different for different people because it will consider different types of frameworks. So I'm sharing my view of critical pedagogy, but your frameworks that you use to guide your online design and development practice in terms of critical digital pedagogy may be a little bit different. But I think that the elements of design and the culturally relevant pedagogy are really critical in terms of creating learning experiences that are learner-centered. Before moving forward, I would really like to take the time to acknowledge my collaborators for this specific part of the presentation. Wei Wei Ji, who is an instructional designer at Arkansas Tech University, and Pauline Salim Muljana, who is an educational technology program manager at Digital Promise. And with them, I was able to work on this publication called the three-tier design process, stream guidelines for designing and developing a course in a learning management system to promote effective learning. And the reasoning behind this specific publication or this framework that we discussed in this publication was that we understand that faculty and instructors are constantly navigating online design and development within the constraints of a learning management system at an institution. And we thought it was really important to discuss this approach, again, within the learning management system. And something else I want to mention is that I will be sharing the slides with all the links with Brittany, and I know that she will be passing it on to everyone that register for the webinar. So you'll have access to all these links once I complete the presentation. So the three-tier design process, like I said, it is a collaborative framework in which we focus on three different aspects of the creation of an online learning experience within a learning management system. The first tier focuses on the design elements, which are the learning objectives, the learning activities, the idea of alignment in an online course, and then the critical aspects of accessibility. The second tier is that of development. So it's like the execution and the creation of the materials, which focuses on the instructional language and the organization of the materials within the learning management system. And I will be sharing various examples of this. for my own personal practice. The third tier is that of user experience, which is often overlooked within the design of learning experiences, because we are constantly working to design and develop, implement, and sometimes we tend to overlook the overall user experience. And this user experience elements are the communication, access to resources, and then the overall navigation of the course. And I'm going to go into each and every one of these elements of the three-tier design process. And before I move on, I want to say that I know that you have had a few other webinars talking about online learning. And some of this will serve as a review of some of the previous conversations, but I also hope that some of the content that I'm sharing today is new knowledge that you are acquiring. So first of all, we want to start with learning objectives. Just like I did in the presentation today, you want to be able to have a set of learning objectives that are guiding the design of your instructional content, whether it is learning objectives that are for an entire course that you are creating, or you are having learning objectives that are set for a specific section of the course. So whether it is a module or a lesson that you have, but you want to have some learning objectives that, again, are SMART. And SMART refers to learning objectives that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And although SMART is a great acronym for creating or writing your learning objectives, I've actually found that a little bit of a scribble of SMART, it's more applicable to what we really do. So before moving to that, a specific refers to who and what. Measurable, how much do you want your learners to be able to accomplish this specific objective? And then achievable, how exactly are you hoping that the students or the learners complete this objective or reach this objective? Relevant, how is it going to be applicable to them, whether it is within the course or it is in real life? And then time bound, there has to be a specific time period within which the learners have to accomplish this specific objective. So that could be a week, 2 weeks, a month, or they have to complete this specific objective by the end of the semester. So that's what SMART refers to. But in reality, you may want to shift those how do you say that guidance of SMART into various of a different type of format. So you might want to say focus on being a specific objective in which you have, again, something that you're trying to measure, making it measurable. How exactly are they going to achieve this? Set the time bound, the relevance, and then setting it so that it's achievable for the learner. So I have an example here that I've used for my specific course. And this is specific in the sense that it focuses on learners will be able to list. So that verb is really important. So knowing exactly what you want the learners to be able to do. So in this case, I want my learners to be able to list. Measurable, so out of a range of different instructional models, I want them to be able to list 5 specific instructional models, time bound by the end of the module, because I need them to know those 5 models before we move on to the next module with 90% accuracy. And then relevant because it increases their instructional design methods. So again, rather than SMART, you can say specific, measurable, time-bound, achievable, and relevant, right? So this is a great way to create learning objectives that, again, help you and help your learners be set for what they hope to accomplish within a specific time period, whether, again, it is a module, a lesson, or by the very end of the semester. So some colleagues and I have gotten into conversations in which we wonder if it's important to share your learning objectives with your learner. If you feel that that's something that you do in your practice, or are learning objectives something that you reserve to yourself as you're going through the design process. So let me stop sharing here, because I'm curious to know your thoughts on sharing learning objectives versus just using them to gain a sense of your design perspective. Yolanda, you said yes, they are adult learners. Marcia says yes. What about others? Do you share your learning objectives as you are going through, sharing your instruction with your students? Overall, seems like the majority are saying yes. Is there anyone that doesn't share their objectives? Michael says, yes, I like to write class objectives. Michael, do you share? So are you doing that as you're interacting with your students? Margaret says, yes, we have a course level objectives for our college courses. And then going to include module objectives based on cue and practice. Perfect. It depends on the learners. I teach ESL, and depending on the level, it may not be accessible to them. Okay. And Michael, thanks. Yes, I write objectives on the whiteboard before every class. Perfect. So just like you have this practice of sharing your learning objectives with your students, seems like in some cases in a face-to-face setting, doing the same in an online setting. I think overall that was the consensus in conversation with other colleagues who are in the online learning space, is raising awareness of the learning objectives helps the students know what direction you're taking with a very specific module, or again, just an overall online course. Just again, giving them goals and perspective that they will ideally reach by the end of the course. So the second element of the three-tier design process, is specifically the design portion, is that one of learning activities. So in the first principle of learning, Merrill describes instruction is more likely to be effective when learners have an opportunity on task, increasing complexity with feedback on their performance. And I feel that this is something that perhaps you've already discussed in previous presentations. It's the concept of scaffolding, and that you are probably familiar with in your teaching practice. And you want to consider a similar approach when it comes to an online learning environment. So there's multiple ways to consider this approach. I want to share some of my personal practice because I teach courses that really lead students to mastery learning. So I need to know that my students at the very end of a course are able to create a online learning experience, right? So it's not just pass or be successful at completing it, but are you able to execute it correctly, right? So option number one, have the students complete a task in the form of a practice. So for example, I have my students create in the multimedia learning class a practice infographic. They then post their infographics into some sort of repository, whether it is uploading it to a Google folder or posting it to a discussion board, and receive feedback from myself and their peers. And then having the opportunity to create an infographic as their final submission, in which they are again receiving feedback from me, but perhaps being also evaluated on a rubric for infographics, right? So one, complete the task for practice, receive feedback, and then complete a similar task for a final submission. So option number one. Option number two is going through a revision feedback loop in which they are able to break down a very large task into multiple submissions, receive feedback, and at the very end have a completed final product. Again, primarily from my practice, I am teaching for the learners being able to execute a task for an environment in which they're going to be practitioners. So in this specific options, they complete a portion of the assignment, receive feedback, make revisions on a previous submission, complete the following task on the assignment, receive feedback, revise previous submission. As they're going through each submission, they are receiving points based on the submissions that they complete. And then they have the opportunity to receive feedback on their final product as well. And what this does, it just breaks down a really large task into multiple submissions. In an online environment, this type of option, this type of approach is much more learner-centered because it takes away from the fear of completing a large task in an asynchronous online class, in which you have some limitations in terms of interactions with your students or interactions with the instructor. So again, you're able to complete a major task without having to wait until the very end of the semester to complete that major task, but you're receiving feedback as you're going through the semester. One of the courses that I've taught in this format is called Systematic Instructional Design, in which, again, the learners are creating an overall learning experience. And their first submission is something like a problem statement. Their second submission is their learning objectives. Their third submission is a task analysis. Their fourth submission is the learner's analysis. So again, they're able to complete this task, receive feedback, and ideally improve and continue with the next task. So again, something to consider in terms of breaking down large assignments into smaller tasks within an online instructional format. Now, the fourth element of the design process is the alignment. And when it comes to the design of online learning experiences within a learning management system specifically, most of the systems that we use function in a module format, right? So you are ideally creating modules that are either set to different objectives or modules that are weekly. My brain, for some reason, works in a weekly format in terms of modules. Or sometimes modules can be set for a specific topics that you're covering. So module one is focused on infographics. Module 2 is focused on the design and development of podcasts. Module 3 is focused on the design of web pages. So again, how exactly you set up a module within your learning management system, or what sets the creation of a module, is really up to you. But overall, learning management systems are set to be used in a module format. So in this specific example that we have here, we are creating an alignment, and an alignment is set for connecting course level objectives that you may have to module level objectives, to the assessment that you have for that specific module, and then the learning activities. So as you can see here in table 1, the learning objective is to express and explain in English using present tense. Then you have your 2 learning objectives that are set for that specific module, and you have your assessment that you're going to be using, a weekly quiz that covers chapter 1 and 2, learning materials with 50 multiple choice, and then a discussion board where the students are going to introduce themselves. And then the learning activities for this specific modules are to read the textbook, review the PowerPoint slides, watch a video 1, watch a video 2. And the alignment of a course is extremely important. The alignment of a course in an online learning setting is extremely important, because it just keeps you as the instructor well organized through the process. And my recommendation is to create an alignment table. So basically what you see here on the screen, but for every module that you will have in your course. And sometimes what has happened to me is that this alignment table actually turns into my course calendar for the students. It's, again, it just gives a student a perspective on the thoughtfulness that has gone into the design of the online course, and it just keeps them engaged, because they just are aware of how everything is connected, with one another. And you can create an alignment table for an in-person course, of course, but creating it for an online environment, it just provides, again, a level of organization and awareness of how everything that you are designing is just like coherent, because it just is connected to one another. So alignment tables are, a thumbs up, something that you definitely want to consider as you are designing your online course. So just a few key takeaways from this portion of the 3-tier design. A few things that you may want to consider is combining your course syllabus and course calendar as one file. This is a practice that I've been doing for the last 10 years, and posting it on my learning management system is extremely beneficial for my students. So one of the very first things that we do as we go through the first week of class is I make an announcement and I say to my students, please make sure you review the course syllabus, which at the very end includes the course calendar. And that pretty much is what we're going to use the remainder of the semester. So it just keeps all the information in one single document. And again, just avoids confusion on where to look for information. List and describe of learning objectives should be articulated consistently if they appear in 2 different locations, such as the module overview and inside a module folder. So one of the things that I like to do is that in my course syllabus, I create very rich descriptions of the learning activities. And once I feel satisfied with the descriptions provided in my learning activities in my course syllabus, then I copy and paste to the learning management systems and the module within the learning management system. And this avoids any kind of confusion in terms of what did I put in my course syllabus versus what I put in the learning management system. So create it in one document and copy and paste to your learning management system. It will save you in terms of having to reply to emails for clarifications and questions that may later come on if there is different types of information in the two different places. Clarify between the difference between required activities and the optional ones. And this is extremely important within your learning management system. And in your course syllabus, you definitely want to make sure that you highlight what is absolutely required of a student and what is something that is optional for them. And the way I do that is that if it's not required, if it's an optional type of resource that I'm sharing with them, I list them as just a resource, a video, a podcast, a journal article that I want them to read. In the module, I have a resources section, and under my resources section, I list anything that is not required or mandatory of the students. And that way they know the difference between the two different types of content. Provide clear and detailed instruction with relevant examples and rubrics on assignment. And I would say that based on experience, this is, if possible, I should have added in there. And I say this because you may be teaching a course that is new, or you may be designing a course in an online format for the very first time. So you may not necessarily have an example to provide for your learners. This past spring, I was teaching a course on trends and issues in learning design. And the assignments that I created were, they were doing them for the very first time. I asked my students to do a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats related to ChatGPT. It was the very first time that I was covering the topic of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT in particular. So I didn't have any relevant examples to share with them. I did have a rubric that I share with them, but I didn't have examples. So I would say provide clear and detailed instructions with relevant examples and rubrics on assignments if possible. So the last topic in terms of design is that of accessibility. Addressing accessibility is something you do for people with disabilities. This is a myth. I didn't want to put it in here, but this is a myth. The reality is that accessible learning materials will help all students regardless of their ability and with a variety of learning needs. And I feel like I am a huge example of this idea of accessible materials because English is not my first language. Spanish, I'm a native Spanish speaker, and I am the kind of person that always turns in the closed captions in order to watch a video. And when I'm watching a movie in English, I will turn in those captions because it helps me. I have been living in the United States for a really long time, and as you can see, I can speak English, but watching a video and having closed captions further helps me understand some of the content that may be shared on the video. So just like I have this personal experience in which I use something that most people would say is beneficial with someone who has an accessibility need, there are many learners who benefit from not only closed captions, but other things that we do in order to make accessible materials accessible to all. For example, I have many of my students who they will turn on the PDF reader, although it's not the only way that they can obtain the content from the PDF, but they do so because it is of benefit to them, because they're listening to the PDF reader and they may be running, they may be doing something else, but at the same time, they're absorbing the content that is being shared by the PDF reader. So I guess I want to give you a couple of minutes for you to share with the class, or well, I'd say call it class, but with others that are part of the session, to think about how you make your content accessible in your face-to-face instruction. And perhaps you can even share how you would make your content accessible in your online course. So I'm going to share the link to the Jamboard, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about this. And perhaps this can serve as a way for others to think about accessibility as well, and how they can make their content accessible in an online environment. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to share on a little sticky note in the Jamboard how, let me go back to the PowerPoint. How do you practice accessibility in your courses in any format? Perhaps we will have some who will share how they do this. I see some of you already posting video transcriptions, descriptions, absolutely. I pull all of my documents, slides, etc. through an accessibility checker before posting or using in class to make sure they are accessible. ADA compliant PowerPoints. And I would say that some institutions, ideally your institution's one of them, provide some sort of formatted documents. I've seen them, I've received them in different types of format. Like I've seen already accessible formatted Google documents for a syllabus that might be created for a course. Something else that you may want to explore is the Office of Disability Services at your institution. Although I did mention that, accessibility is something that we do for all our students, some of the services may be connected to the Office of Disability Services. I know that at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, that's the office that I would contact. And if I wanted to get captions for recordings of my sessions or online sessions, or if I wanted to have a video that's already existing, but I wanted to have it captioned, I would contact the Office of Disability Services, because they are the ones that provide those services. Survey at the beginning of the course on best ways you learn or best ways of receiving information. That's great. And I feel like that connects a little bit to universal design for learning, which we will talk a little bit here in a bit. I teach hybrid classes and use both written and virtual materials in the class. Let me go ahead and share the Jamboard so we can see it here. Perfect. I teach hybrid classes and use both written and virtual materials in that class. I see. Kahoot to allow students to engage that don't feel comfortable speaking in public due to disabilities. That's a great way. I love Kahoot. It's a great way also to kind of create like a little bit of competition, but not like, unhealthy competition. It's very important with my ESL learners to make all instruction accessible to their language level. So keeping language to a level that's adequate for the students. Concrete examples as well as conversations, perfect. And transcripts, making sure that pictures have alt text. I've seen quite a bit of an increase on the use of alt text, I would say, and that not only is for like instructional software, but also for other things in our everyday life, like social media. I know for a long time, many of the social media sites did not have alt text, and I've seen that quite a bit. And as someone who uses social media for teaching and learning, that has been very beneficial. Although I do feel like it's a constant reminder to myself to do that, just because it has not been part of my practice on a regular basis. Student intake form with learning style assessment. And I would say that learning preferences assessment as part of the learning design literature. We have talked extensively about the myth of learning styles, but I do like to highlight to my students the need and importance of learning preferences that we have. And I can share some literature related to learning styles versus learning preferences. Thank you all so much for sharing. I think that, it makes me happy to know that this is something that is important and that you have been practicing throughout your, instruction, because accessibility is becoming increasingly important. Again, not just for students who have accessibility needs, but for all our students, all our learners. Let me go back to this slide. Okay. So a few accessibility tips to consider, and you have already sort of addressed some of this in the comments that you have provided. It is crucial to properly lay out textual content in a sequential hierarchy and avoid copying content with formats that would cause technical issues. Just this morning, I found myself copy and pasting from one document to another. And sure enough, I could not see where there was an issue with the formatting. And it took me moving a margin to notice that the content was broken in a way that was not normal. So sometimes when we are copying and pasting, it may seem like the content is copying and pasting adequately, but it may not necessarily be that. So you have to be very aware when you're copying and pasting what formatting is it going to copy into. The use of full line justification should be avoided, as it creates unnatural large or small spaces between words and makes it the flow of content more difficult to follow. And sometimes this is really difficult or not challenging for someone who doesn't have a visual impairment, but it could cause disruption for someone who has issues reading from a computer screen, or just like issues viewing content, right? Or reading content. So things that may seem not like a huge challenge for someone who doesn't have a disability may be causing distress to somebody else. Using only 2 or 3 types of font. I think that this is a huge one for me. or four font sizes. Text sizes should be strongly considered. And I would also add, and I think that there's another point that I make in the next slide about text and font colors. Sometimes I get an email and I see text in like fuchsia or bright green, and I'm just thinking, why do we need those color choices for text when really we should just aim for colors for text that are good contrast with the background. I don't think that a fuchsia or bright green it's one of those. Providing synchronized closed captions, which is something that several of you have mentioned already in the Jamboard, and alternative text for images, and thoughtful text formatting should be considered during course design. And I think one of the really important things with alternative text is how we are really describing what is in the image. It's not always regurgitating what was in the image or text that may be in the image, but it's also providing an idea of what is in the image. The illustrations or what it is that that person would be able to see if they looked at the image. If the intent is to emphasize certain content, solely using color text should be avoided. As I mentioned, color text, it's a huge thing that we need to keep in mind in terms of accessibility. Even at my own institution, on our official institution colors, I don't feel like they're necessarily accessible. So I find myself breaking the marketing rules of my institutions. Please do not tell them. Something else that is really important to consider in terms of technology and accessibility is the evaluation of our products or the products that we use for our learners to make sure that the technology is accessible to all learners. The tools that we use are accessible to all learners. So I share this in here, but I would encourage you to look within your institutional system to see if they have something similar to it. At the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, we have accessible products evaluation guidelines. So I can contact the Office of Information Technology and say, hey, I want to use this specific tool. Can you tell me if it's going to be accessible to all students? And this is probably going to trickle down all the way to the Office of Disability Services, but it will help me determine if the tool that I'm going to use is going to be accessible to all students. And if it's not, then they can either find a different tool that I can use, or just say, again, this is going to be difficult for some of your students. You might want to consider a different alternative or not use this product at all. So I think that it's really important to evaluate the technology that we're going to use. So in terms of software that the students may have to use as part of their online learning experience, especially if it's an asynchronous course. Again, there tends to be a lot less social interaction. So a student may sort of like suffer in silence without knowing that they could reach out to you and ask you if there's an alternative for them to use. In terms of development, one of the things that we need to consider is the instructional language. And something as simple as using descriptor versus bullet points is really important in an online environment. And you're going to see some of the examples related to my modules, but in a descriptive language, you have your content set up in a paragraph format, whereas you can just put it in a bullet format and say, exam instructions, 60 multiple choice questions, 40 minutes, 2 attempts allowed, highest score will be recorded. Again, very straight to the point and easy to manage content. So when it comes to the learning management system, especially because of the way they are designed, bullet points is a much better alternative to consider. Now, I love organizing things, and organizing my modules at the very beginning of the semester. One of the things that brings me the most joy. But this is an example of how I would organize my module. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, my modules are set on a weekly basis, because normally every week we transition to a different topic. So in my module, you're likely to find a rubric for any type of assignment that the students may have to complete that specific week. The learning materials, and that could be anything from a reading that they have to complete, so a link to the chapter, the journal article, or anything else that they have to read. It could also be a video that they have to view, or they have to listen to a podcast. So whatever type of learning materials, I will make sure to include it and signal it as a learning material. If they have an exam, which I'm very unlikely to give an exam, perhaps a short quiz, there will be a link to the quiz. If there are discussion forums, I will include them in there as well. And then, as I mentioned previously, any sample assignments that could be shared with the students, I included in my module as well. And then sometimes something that we sometimes may overlook is software instruction. So if the students have to use, let's say, for example, Padlet, and they have never used Padlet before, I will include a short video on how to use Padlet. Or if they have to use something like Flipgrid, and they have never used Flipgrid, which is a discussion form that uses different kinds of modality, I will include a link to a short tutorial on how to use Flipgrid. And I was a Blackboard user because that's what my institution we use at the University of Tampa for 9 years. So this is sort of like a look at what my course would look like. So on the side, I really like to take time to organize my menu. I always have a star here on my left side menu, and that's where the students are going to read a description of the course, where they're going to look at the objectives for the course, the required technology, internet and a laptop, or if there's anything else that they need, I will include it in there. Also in the star here is where I would include my course netiquette. That will be listed in there as well. And it would be the first thing that I would ask them to read when I would send the announcement for the course on the first week of classes. Then I have a link to meet the instructor, so myself in that case. I have a link to the virtual office hours, as well as information on when those virtual office hours occur. Then I have my document that is the syllabus and the calendar, but I like to put it on my left navigation menu because if they have a question about the syllabus or if they have a question about the calendar, I want them to log into the learning management system and see that there. Then a link to the virtual Zoom room. Go back. Oops. And I also have a conversation cafe. And the conversation cafe, you're going to see later on in this presentation, is really an opportunity for the students to connect with each other, to create community. It is not a graded environment. It really is more about socializing and connecting with one another. And then I have the link to the modules, which in Blackboard would look something like this. And I would, again, put the first day of the week and the format in which we were meeting that specific week. And I think that saved the students a lot of time on trying to figure out, like, are we meeting on campus? Are we doing asynchronous work? Are we meeting via Zoom? It just helped them understand what we were actually doing that specific week. And then I would include, I call it points in here, but it really was the gradebook. And my students, they were aware that that was the gradebooks, but I just put it points in there so they knew where they would look at their points in the course. And then I like to include some other links that were beneficial to the students, the email link, any tools that they may want to explore in Blackboard. So this is what my course would look like in Blackboard. Now, over the last year, I've transitioned to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and here we use Canva. And the nice thing about the learning management system is that once you use one learning management system, it's not going to be identical to the other one, but it's going to be close enough that you will have an idea on how to navigate in the learning management system. Again, it's not going to be exactly the same. I did have to find assistance from YouTube and maybe connect with the instructional technology department a few times, but I was able to, figure my way around Canvas. So similarly, I have a left navigation menu, and I try to keep it simple for my students. So this is the student view. And I always have my announcements. Here, there's no star here, but it's called home. And that's where I put, critical information about the course. And in Canvas, it is the landing page for the students. Then I put in my announcements, which I keep my announcements in record. Like, I do not delete my announcements throughout the course. I keep them in there because I share links to resources. I share activities that they may have completed in the announcement. So they may have completed a Jamboard activity during a class session, a synchronous online session, and I want to share that link with them. So I keep my announcements posted throughout the entire semester. Then I have my syllabus, which again is a combination of my syllabus and calendar. And I have my modules, grades, and then other resources that the students may find beneficial for the course. So again, trying to keep it nice, organized, and straightforward for the students. And here's a view of what a module, inside a module, it would look like for my course. So on January 24, we had a meeting outline with an introduction and a course syllabus. And in Canvas, you can click on this, and there's like different subsections that you can see in this specific web page. But then I also talked about the instruction and course expectations. And in this particular day, we created a course playlist that was like music that the students like to listen to, and I would aim to put some of the music that they like at the very beginning of the class or when we had a break during our synchronous session. And here you can see a few other outlines of what the modules look like throughout the semester. And something that I always try to do is have some sort of activity because I primarily teach in an online synchronous class. So I try to have some sort of like activity when we meet synchronously, in which, again, we are getting to know each other. We are creating community because some of the students may know each other, some of them do not know each other. So just, again, trying to create community and increase social presence. Now transitioning to the topic of user experience, there are the elements of communication that we want to make sure that we have with the students. The office hours, you may have seen them in some of the screenshots that I've shared. Office hours, office numbers, office locations, response policy, etiquettes of communication. So one of those things that I like to be very upfront with my students is that although I may teach in an online format, I'm not online 24/7. So I have specific times in which I'm going to be available and I'm going to be able to respond to them in a timely manner. And during the week, I'm very upfront. I'll probably communicate and respond to you, I don't know, within 24 hours. Depending on the week during the semester, it may take me a little bit longer, or if I'm on email, I might respond immediately, right? But I think that it just helps the students set expectations on when they can communicate with you, and perhaps even when they may have a follow-up email in case they have not heard from you, right? So I think that setting expectations in terms of communication is extremely helpful. I also tell my students that the best way to communicate with me is via email, and in particularly if they email me directly to my inbox. In Canvas, for example, they do have a feature where the students can send an email in Canvas, and sometimes that's like an extra step that you may have to take if you have to log into Canvas to respond to an email. So if they email me directly to my inbox, then it just makes it easier. Then there are the elements of netiquette, and it is really important to establish netiquette with your students from the very beginning of the semester or the quarter or however format you're teaching, right? And so this specific elements of netiquette we're taking from an online learning program that was established by an indigenous group in Canada, and they refer to respect, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility, and relationship. So again, just thinking about who your classmates are and what kind of environment you're trying to set for your online course. And just an example of how this 5 R's translate into netiquette. I've posted in here, this is the exact wording that I use in my courses. Be respectful of others' views and opinions. Be sensitive to the fact that online participation represents a variety of different political and religious beliefs. I also state in there that there will be disagreement, which is fine and encouraged, but it should be followed by rational discourse. Use good stace when composing your responses. Swearing and profanity should be avoided because it's just being respectful to others who are not used to that. I may curse like a pirate, but I'm not going to curse like a pirate in front of other people who, it makes them feel uncomfortable. Also, other practices such as using capital letters may be equated with shouting. And then let's avoid assumptions. We often use acronyms, but really, I don't know what every acronym in this planet really means, so please spell it out. Also, in terms of privacy, being able to handle private information that is shared within the course content, and avoiding sharing any kind of private information about classmates and professors with anyone outside the class, and then being accurate and factual. So again, I've used this netiquette with my students for every course that I've taught online, and I go over them. And if I'm not meeting with my students synchronously, I'm always make sure to highlight the importance of reading through the netiquettes. And then, as I mentioned, as part of my module, one of the things that I like to include is ensuring that there are resources that the students may need whether it is that they need to use a piece of software or something else. So any tutorial, demos, or link to additional resources should be considered in terms of user experience for the students. The less they have to go digging, I think the better the online learning experience is going to be for them. So something that I aim to do before launching every class is going through the experience of navigating the course. So doing the desktop device testing, and if possible, mobile device testing, because so many of our students will be accessing our course in a mobile device. It's really important. It just guys allows you to see how the content is coming through to the student. Then something that may be beneficial for your students, especially if they're taking a course with you for the very first time, is having some sort of navigation video that they can follow, that lets them know what do the items in the left navigation mean to you, or where is it going to take them, and how the modules may be organized. It doesn't really have to be a really lengthy video. I would actually recommend something less than 10 minutes, because based on research, the longer the video, the less likely the students are to review the content. So keeping that video in less than 10 minutes will be beneficial. But again, just critical information of what's the layout of your course. I found that for the most part, once my students have taken one class with me in an online format, they are able to find their way around my learning management system formatting. And then I've already talked about the use of announcements, but sending out announcements and keeping them throughout the semester, it might help students access content that may have been shared at the beginning of the semester, and they're looking for, during midterms or something like that. So yes, just making sure that the content's available in the announcements. So now I would like to pause for questions that you may have for me, or that you may want to share with others. Any questions that come to mind? With higher level ESL students, I record them sharing what the class was about at the end of the term and use that for students in the following term. So how do you record them? Oh, you record the students, sorry, took me a little while. So you record the students sharing what the class was about at the end of the term and use that for my students in the following. That's a great idea. And actually that's also beneficial in terms of student evaluations, right? So getting them to think through the process of what they did that semester and how much they have accomplished. That's a great way to do that. Thank you, Steve. I was also going to share a piece of software that I use, and I don't know if it's necessarily available for desktops, but it's called Mixed Captions. I saw that someone shared something about closed captionings in classroom. Mixed Captions is a software that I have. It's an application that I have on my phone, and it is artificially intelligence generated captions, so auto captions generated, and it is an absolutely wonderful tool. It is there's a cost to the application, and I think I put like $20 worth of captions maybe 3 years ago, and I swear I've never had to pay for it again. And I have captions, I don't like several videos, and it will do very lengthy videos. It is on my phone. I do not know if there's a desktop version of the software, but if you have a 10-minute video and you need to put captions in it, I highly recommend it. I just used it 2 weeks ago as I was creating a course for school librarians, and I wanted to do 2 7-minute videos, and it worked great. So I recommend mixed captions if it's something that you want to do your own and you don't want someone else to do. Any other questions, comments that you would like to make or that you may have for me?
And you all can feel free to unmute as well if you have any questions that way.
Absolutely.
Hi, my name is Margot Vance. I actually do have a question.
Go ahead.
I have been teaching online since the pandemic, pretty much. And so I went through a QM quality course that my school offers. But in thinking of everything that you can do online, it can seem overwhelming, the amount of things that are necessary for an online learner. Is there like maybe a hierarchy of things for somebody that's just kind of getting started or hasn't been doing it that long? You know, what are some maybe higher level things that should be in that course? And then what are some things that, okay, you know, get to them later if you need to in a different semester, but what are some things that are like must-haves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm working on a project with some colleagues who are, we are teaching school librarians, basically what we're doing here, how to teach online. And we went through the first cohort of school librarians last summer, and we received feedback and we're tweaking, and we launched the program again this past Monday. And that's exactly what happened in our very first iteration of the teaching of the course last summer, is that we realized that it was way too much for the students to complete, for the school librarians to complete. And we were being like overachievers on how much content we wanted to share, how many activities we wanted them to do. What I've personally have done this summer is I started with a start here. I'm going to type it as I talk. Start here video for each module. And start here for video for each module. Then I set a reading, and this reading is one reading per module. And then after they have the readings, then I added additional resources that are required for them to view. And there are 2 short videos, 10 minutes max. And the 10 minutes actually comes from research on microlearning. And what the research has found is that anything past 10 minutes, the students you're gonna start losing your audience, start losing the students to get to view the content. And I can share actually an entire module that one of my students did on microlearning, which was extremely informative. I'll share with Brittany, and Brittany can share it with you. But yeah, so short videos, less than 10 minutes, and then 2 short activities. So this is what I've done this semester or this summer compared to last summer. And then anything else outside of that, I've said as resources that are optional, because I want the students to have actual access to the additional readings. I want them to see other videos, but I don't necessarily feel like it's absolutely needed for them in order to continue to the next module. So I don't want to say that this is the formula for everyone, but it's something that I found to work with me in this specific context. Because yes, you can have a very intense course in which every module the students are doing or have to watch this video, and then they have to read this, and then they have to do, 5 activities. And then there's like all these other things that they have to do. It's just, and they have to do discussion boards. So you can set all the things in your course, but I think sometimes what's really needed is the time to develop a course and then look back and think, is this too much? Sometimes I think we should err on the side of too little versus too much. And of course, you're going to teach a course for the very first time. You're ideally going to get feedback, and you're going to have time to revise your course. Ideally, the same course. But yes, I think sometimes in an online environment, just because we can keep on adding content, it's easy to go down that path of adding too much, because we feel like we need to fill every little bit of time of our learners, or they're going to feel like they didn't get enough. And that's not necessarily true. Just completing a reading every week, watching videos and completing an activity is probably more than what a student may do if they're sitting in a class for an hour, right? So yeah, we need to, the balance between how much we have the students do or how much content we share with them versus what we expect them to do every week, it's something that we probably struggle with a lot. I hope that helps answer that question. Are there anything anyone else would like to share based on their experience? How do you work with students with low digital literacy? That's an excellent question. I think the best way to work newly arrived immigrants who have not used computers. Okay, so thank you. I appreciate, because that could mean so many different things, right? I think probably one of the very first things that you may have to do as an instructor is recommendations for the students based on resources that you may have at your institution. Like, for example, I know that because of some connections I have at Hillsborough Community College in Tampa, where I used to live, students who had low digital literacy would often go to the Student Success Center. And at the Student Success Center, they would be provided with information on how to log into the computer and access the Canvas site. Oh, born and raised in Tampa, wonderful. I again just moved from Tampa last year. So the students would go to the Student Success Center, and they would be provided with information on how to log into their Canvas and access their course. I think it's a challenging task. It's not something that they may accomplish everything in one day, but it helps them gain a sense of one, where they could get help, and two, an idea of how to navigate the course that they may have the learning management system. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I thank you for that. maybe it's better if I explain.
Mhm.
So I teach a primarily ESL population at a community-based organization. And, some of them are newly arrived refugees. In some of our partners, they come from Afghanistan, where they have very low digital literacy. They have very little experience with computers or technology. And some of our classes are online synchronous at real time. So we don't have the same kind of resources that a typical university might have in terms of digital literacy classes or training. And so I'm just curious if you or anybody else have had similar situations, and how to kind of do in the moment training or helping them figure out things. For example, I had a student who, she's older woman, speaks Chinese, and her phone is in Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, and so I was trying to get her to use an app on the phone, and she also had fairly low digital literacy. So both of those barriers were there. And ultimately, I couldn't figure out how to get that to work for her. And so just had to unfortunately give up. So I'm just curious if you or anybody else has experienced that and some strategies to use.
That's a challenging one. I was going to say that since you had the students synchronously, Germania has a great, that's exactly where I was going to go with having like a tech tutoring session. So being able to provide like a session in which you literally just go over all the technology that you're going to use, or showcasing like being able to pinpoint, here's where you click, this is how exactly how this works, or here are the steps that you have to follow through. The other thing I was going to recommend is having like a PDF and having step-by-steps on how to navigate a specific application or the learning management system. But knowing that she was using the application in Chinese, that's like another layer that I feel is outside my context, outside my expertise. Although I've had students who prefer to use the technology in their own native language, but then they have some sort of worry of translating the website into English, and we're able to communicate. Appeal to your student center to help with this need. Germania has some really good recommendations. I wonder if there is any community organization that you can reach out to.
Yeah, it's a little bit different with CBOs, and that we're organized a little differently than community colleges, universities, and we kind of do everything. So, but we do have an office technology bridge program or class where they specifically learn office technology. These are ESL students, so it's a little bit of a different population that we teach, because they're not only learning English, they're learning maybe literacy. Some of them may have very little literacy in their own language, as well as digital literacy. So it's really tackling a bunch of challenges for them at once. And sometimes, we don't have the same kind of resources that a community college or university has. So it's particularly maybe a different kind of situation than maybe.
Yeah, I was also going to think I wonder if there's any other student in your student population that can serve as a partner. I don't know. Oh, it says
Yeah, I like Germania's
mhm.
that's actually a really nice recommendation.
Yeah, because there may be someone else another student that can serve as a partner, or I'm thinking of a community organization that may be able to provide some assistance.
Yeah, usually right now it's done informally, like another student who speaks their respective language will sit with them. Herminia, thank you, Herminia.
Herminia, thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll sit with them and kind of go over with them during a break or at the end of class and just try to get them set up. I'm thinking both in terms of online learning and in-person learning. So this can be a challenge in both situations, but of course, especially online learning.
Yeah, I'm also I would also say if there's any kind of like student services office, ideally they will be able to provide some assistance somehow, because this, the student came to the institution. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't provide any more.
No, it's okay. I'm just curious if you or anybody else. I like Hermania's idea about the bridge students tutoring. So I think I'm going to write that down and think about that. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, thanks for asking. I'm glad that others who are part of the webinar can provide their insights. Okay, I'm going to continue sharing and I'm gonna to stay in course in terms of time. Going to talk a little bit more about cultural responsive pedagogy and online teaching and learning, which is a great question by Steve, kind of leading into this topic, because the challenges can be very different in different places. Before moving on to that topic, I would like to acknowledge my collaborator, Maria Luna Thomas, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager on an organization called Curriculum Associates. But at the time in which we were collaborating, she was actually an instructor at a university in the UK. And in her role, she just worked very closely with students who were Black, Indigenous, or from other minority groups. And we wrote this book chapter titled Culturally Relevant Pedagogy in Digital Praxis. The premise of this specific book chapter actually came from some things that were happening in the United States at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, which were conversations related to the Black Lives Matter movement and racial equity and racial violence that was happening in the country at that time, but that were also seen in the UK. So we wrote this chapter from both the perspective of the US and the UK. And the link to the book is here in the PowerPoint slides. The book is open access. I highly recommend everyone exploring them. You may find some of the chapters to be beneficial to your practice. But our chapter in particular was called Culturally Relevant Pedagogy in Digital Praxis. So are any of you familiar with culturally relevant pedagogy? Let me stop here. It's a topic that has been discussed quite a bit lately. And I've seen culturally relevant pedagogy in K-12 significantly. I have not necessarily seen so much of it in the higher education setting, but I've seen it explored in K-12, and we had definitely not seen much of it in the online learning environment. So that's what helped us and encouraged us to write this a specific book chapter. So, okay, to try to stay again within the time of the presentation, I'll move forward. So just a short video about culturally relevant pedagogy. Let me know if you have issues with the audio. Culturally relevant pedagogy is founded upon the desire to address what Latson Billing calls deficit paradigms of teaching, in which students are perceived as inadequate and in need of corrective instruction. It builds upon early democratically oriented pedagogies that at their core aim to foster greater cohesion among culture, home, community, and classroom. Culturally relevant pedagogy is distinct in its insistence that pedagogical application always advances critical consciousness of social and political systems of oppression. Variants of critical relevant pedagogy are wide-ranging and include culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally relevant schooling, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and culturally revitalizing pedagogy. Nearly 2 decades after Latson-Billings introduced her theory, she offered a retrospective on her research and its theoretical offshoot, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy 2.0, urging scholars and educators to transition to more contemporary, culturally sustaining pedagogy. Okay, so again, as I mentioned before, my collaborator and I, we were very interested on elements of culture in online learning environments, and we had yet to see a framework or guidance on how to really connect culture with online learning experiences, similar to what Steve had just recently mentioned on his question to us. But one of the first things that we thought of and that we thought was really important as part of like integrating culturally relevant pedagogy into online learning practice is kind of reflecting of our own experiences as instructors and thinking through our positionality and our subjectivity on who we are as individuals. So in the process of, having this conversation, both of us wrote about our positionality and our subjectivity. In my case, I am a Latinx individual. I primarily identify as an Afro-Latinx woman. I completed my K-12 education outside the United States in Panama. Then became an immigrant, and I participated in higher education in Canada and the United States. Do not come from a privileged background, and education was sort of like instilled in me by my family as something that could help my upbringing or help me. And then my upbringing, educational experiences, and immigrant status kind of has provided me a cultural standpoint and a disposition towards being inclusive, equal, socially just in education. So just having the opportunity to reflect on those experiences really makes me think about how I walk into a learning experience. Like, for example, Steve just sharing the experience that his student is having, is something that is going to be on my mind, because just from my interactions here in Knoxville and connecting with the refugee center, I know that those are experiences that new immigrants have in this country that really may be a challenge to them in terms of, being part of an educational system, but, just thinking about being part of an educational system online, it just creates a bigger challenge. So it's really important that we think about our positionality and subjectivity. I think that this is particularly important for colleagues who have other type of positionality and subjectivity and need to kind of create a connection with students who are from different cultural backgrounds. So again, is an important conversation to have as ourselves as the instructor, but also it may be an important conversation to have with our students. And I think that having these conversations provides a certain level of transparency, and it's not necessarily going to limit our biases, our positionality or subjectivity or change it, but it just makes it transparent to all who are part of the learning experience, both the instructor and the students. Something else that we thought was really important in terms of considering a cultural relevant pedagogy in an online environment, and actually very much applies to an in-person environment, is the idea of knowledge democracy. And we tend to have, in our experiences in the US, I think we have very US-centric and Eurocentric knowledge that tend to guide our teaching. And the reality is that there are multiple epistemological frameworks that knowledge doesn't just occur in, you know, a North American bubble or a Eurocentric bubble. We need to think of our curricular resources, whether it is journal articles, books, the guest speakers that we consider for our classes, the resources that we provide to our students, and different theoretical perspective and paradigms to consider like global knowledge. There are pockets of knowledge in other regions of the world that are important to bring into our classroom, and we need to make our students very aware of that. And again, that's something that I like to consider in terms of, you know, providing my students access to other voices in the learning experience. When I think of my guest speakers, well, let's talk about instructional design practice in Latin America. And what does that mean from the Latin American experience? Let's talk about instructional design in South Africa. Because there's a lot of you know, knowledge coming from South Africa in terms of instructional design. So similarly, you may have a different knowledge base, and you may have different knowledge pockets globally. Think about those different perspectives and how you bring them into your classroom. I know that some instructors are very locked on what they can and cannot teach in their courses, or the curriculum very set, but think of other ways in which you can engage your learners in knowledge democracy. Also, something else that's really important in terms of online learning environments is representation. Allowing the learners to be able to see themselves in the learning space. And I feel that this is really a challenge with learning environments. I have tried to do this myself in terms of like decorating my online learning environment, just as I would decorate my physical classroom and make my students from different cultural perspectives feel welcome. I think it's really important to do the same with an online environment, right? So what are the illustrations that we're using to make our students feel seen, right? And there's an angle of intersectionality that we need to consider in terms of illustrations, just one side of it, but considering the physical abilities and qualities of our students, the age range that it's represented in our structure, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their race, their gender. So it's not only culture from the perspective of nationality, but in terms of identity in a multitude of different intersectional ways, right? So in this slide, I provide two different links to diverse and inclusive stock photos and culturally diverse stock photos that I feel that you will find beneficial. Something that my colleagues say when they see one of my presentations is that they need to like increase their game in terms of illustrations, and that's because when I create a presentation, I want everyone who's going to be part of that learning experience to feel seen or feel represented. And the same thing with my online classroom. I want all my students to feel seen, to feel represented. And I love, well, although it's a challenge right now, I'm glad that Steve brought up his example related to like a language experience, because I think something that we need to do is find ways of embracing home languages and how do we integrate that into the learning experience. Living in Tampa for such a long time, I had the privilege of having students from various parts of the world, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, Korea, so many other places. And there are ways in which we can ideally support our students. And I think that the fact that there is a digital literacy issue is, can be very challenging on itself. But supporting home languages is something that we can do by, not punishing our learners, but rather thinking of grammatical mistakes and how can it inform, the way we teach our students. And this is particularly important in terms of writing and writing assignments. I think that in higher education, we have a high number of assignments that are by default writing assignments. When in reality, they could be other forms of assessment. But I think that something that we can consider in terms of writing assignments is having low stakes writing assignments that allow us to see the writing capabilities of our students, yet give us an opportunity to provide feedback and improve. And I know that this is not always the case, but it's a possibility. So one of the things that I like to do with my students is that I like them to create a blog. And I set very strict guidelines for the blog. Your blog entry is going to be no max of 1,500 words. And you're going to write, I don't say academic, but you're going to write in a publishable way, I guess I could say, use that word. But it's a low stake writing assignment. It's not like a major writing assignment, so it's not overwhelming. But again, it gives us an opportunity to see the writing ability of our students, provide feedback, and ideally improve on that feedback. Another way is to encourage digital collaboration about learners with fluency in the same language. So one of the group of students that I actually had two students that were from Brazil, and they would often collaborate together because it helped them with navigating the assignment together, but they also enjoyed speaking the same language. They both spoke Brazilian Portuguese, so they communicated in Brazilian Portuguese, and then when they would talk to me, they would talk to me in English. So again, allowing for collaboration between students. And that just kind of relates to the next point, is encouraging these learners to collaborate and use their home language to incorporate prior knowledge, clarify complex concepts, or ask each other questions. And then again, just like we would decorate our physical environment with images that are welcome of individuals from different cultural backgrounds, is considering greetings, terms, expressions in our online content. that the students may find welcoming and, allow them to see their language value rather than discourage. Another aspect of culturally relevant pedagogy in an online environment is the idea of critical selection of educational technology. And I've kind of touched upon this topic a little bit in the prior section of the presentation, in which I discuss, contacting the Office of Information Technology and kind of gaining a sense of whether a specific technology is going to be inclusive to all. And the same thing, kind of like refers to this topic of critical selection of educational technology. Does our educational technology turn a blind eye on race, ethnicity, power dynamic issues? So we have to be considerate of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color. One of the things that we experienced significantly the first year or 2 years of the start of the COVID-19 pandemic was just like we're doing right now, the use of Zoom for instructional purposes. And what started happening, we started having the Zoom bombings. And it happened to me one time. I was in a panel presentation, and hackers were able to get a hold of the link. And sure enough, we had very racially inappropriate things said during our webinar. And, everybody was sort of like shaken once we were able to get the hackers out of the session. It was extremely disrespectful. It was like very difficult to process, right? So that happened because like Zoom was never really intended to be an instructional tool. It was really intended to be a meeting platform. And here we had adopted this technology without really thinking of the consequences of using it for instructional purposes. So similar to that experience, we need to think about how we are integrating technology into our learning practice. Although we can have the Office of Information Technology evaluate the tool for accessibility purposes, I think that it's also important to consider in terms of how it harms or supports our BIPOC learners. Some colleagues of mine have started this project called Civics of Technology Project. And as part of this project, there's actually a web page, and I put the link here in the PowerPoint. They talk about how technology is not neutral, and neither are the societies in which we introduce them. So we need to question the technology before we implement it in our classes. And they have some open educational resources that you can use to evaluate technology that you may already be using or that you may be considering using in your online courses. And some of the questions that they post, and there's a link to the Google document in here. They question, what does society give up for the benefit of that technology? And it can be any kind of technology that you're considering using. Who is harmed and who's benefit from the technology? What does the technology need? So is it content that users are providing for free, sort of like social media? What are the unintended or unexpected consequences or changes caused by the technology? And why is it difficult to imagine our world without the technology? So again, it just kind of gets us reflecting on this use of this specific technology that we're thinking about using, because sometimes technology may seem attractive, but we are not aware of what consequences, harms or benefits may come from using that technology in our online course. The other element that we consider as part of a culturally relevant pedagogy in an online course is that whole idea of tapping into learners' culture through social presence. And social presence means has different elements. There's the affective association, so kind of creating a sort of like connection with your students or between the students and their other students. The idea of creating community. So who's part of the learning experience, the students getting to know each other, the instructor and the students getting to know each other, which it can be very challenging in an asynchronous format, and also it can be very challenging in a synchronous format. Interaction intensity, so how much are you interacting with your students? Is it a discussion board format? Is it, you know, a synchronous session where you're doing like a Jamboard, or students are able to unmute and share with the classroom? Then there's also knowledge and experience and the instructor investment. How much is the instructor giving back to the learning experience? So all of these aspects come together to form what's called social presence. Ideally, there's a high level of affective association, community cohesion, a high level of interaction. There's a high level of investment of the instructor, and there's knowledge and experience. But depending on how big your course may be, how many students there may be in it, or how you have created design your course, some of these elements may be lacking or some may be more present than others. But ideally, there's a balance between all of them. I think probably one of the best ways to create this conversation or this high level of social presence with your students is by getting to know them. And that may mean in the first day, you know, tell me a little bit about you. And this may be synchronous or maybe asynchronous as well. Maybe you are using poll everywhere and you're creating some sort of quiz or survey in which the students can respond. And then by the end of the week, you're sharing the results with everyone in the class. Or if there's an opportunity for a synchronous meeting, you may have these questions posted on a slide and the students are able to complete a poll everywhere survey, right? And you don't have to do it just the very first day of class. It may be a very short activity that you do at the very beginning of a class session or at the very beginning of a module. The conversation cafe is another example of you know, an activity that you can do that helps increase social presence. And I include my conversation cafe in my learning management system. And it's just like, you know, different forums that are they're not graded. They're just for the students to share and to, you know, connect with their other classmates. So I have one, tell us more about you, questions to classmates, interesting articles that you may have found and you want to share with the rest of your class, and any wellness and positivity aspect that you want to share with your classmates or the instructor. It can be a meme, a funny video, something that happened to you, all sorts of different things that can be shared in an asynchronous format. But again, you're trying to increase that social presence, that connection between the learners, and also trying to get to know your students. The culturally relevant pedagogy framework that we wrote about also focuses on creating empathy and care. an empathy and care for particularly BIPOC students in online learning environments, and supporting them through different experiences that that they may be going through. And in this particular case, we focus on universal design for learning, which I feel that several of you have already mentioned in the chat as I've asked for examples for other things. So I included a short video in case universal design for learning is new for anyone in the group. We are at 1:27, so I'm just gonna leave the video here, but I'm going to go on to the next slide and just play the video. Sorry.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests in autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways. Allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.cast.org.
Okay, so I'm glad that I played the video because it just provided a great synopsis for the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. And I've included a link here so that you can, explore it in more detail. But it just, the guidelines break down engagement, representation, and action and expression in a multitude of different ways. And you can look at the different subheadings in each of it, and you can explore how you can consider integrating universal design for learning in your online courses. So I'm going to stop here. I've provided a few other examples of universal design for learning, the use of a liquid syllabus, and then the use of asynchronous discussion boards, and then integrating students as co-designers in the learning experience. So with that, I'm gonna leave the presentation here and address any questions that you may have or any comments that may come to mind. And I thank you so much for staying for the presentation. I just, I feel like we could talk a little bit more, but I know that others are, you have other obligations. So I understand those that had to leave, but I really appreciate you staying for the remainder of the presentation.